The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is always an honour to be able to stand in this place and speak on behalf of the great people of Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman, as well as in my role as Shadow Minister of National Defence to reflect the concerns that are out there from the defence community, including the brave women and men who serve in uniform, about some of the changes that are taking place by the Liberals and the lack of interest and lack of investment in the Canadian Armed Forces. I'll be splitting my time with the great member from Oxford, and I do want to give a big shout out to the MPs from Kamloops, our Shadow Minister for Public Safety, the member of Parliament for Calgary Nose Hill is our Shadow Minister for Immigration, and the member from Saskatoon West who just spoke. Really put a lot of work into this bill C-12, on the immigration side, on the public safety issues, on border security. And it's through their good work and the amount of exposure that we've been able to do as Conservatives that we were able to mobilize citizens and civil society on Bill C-2 and looking at all the violations of civil liberties that were done by the Liberals in a real big power grab that would erode charter rights of those from search and seizure done by Canada Post employees, done by invasion of privacy rights online and through telecoms, through banking changes that would all violate the civil liberties of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. The Privacy Commissioner himself said that he was never confirmed or even consulted by the Liberals on the drafting of Bill C-2 and had a number of concerns about it. And, you know, we should never be bringing forward bills here that erode the civil liberties of law-abiding Canadians, and that's what these Liberals continue to do time and time again, is to go after those like law-abiding firearms owners rather than going after the gun smugglers and those that are using guns in illicit crime. They'll always go do the easy thing, make it sound like they're doing something, but at the end of the day, all they do is target law-abiding Canadians. So, on C-12, as Conservatives, we'll do our homework. We'll continue to look through this bill to make sure that Canadians' rights are protected, that they're not bringing forward, the Liberals aren't bringing forward any, sneaky new laws, trying to breach the rights of Canadians through this, especially civil liberties and privacy rights. But we're concerned that there's things in here that aren't actually going to do anything to improve immigration or improve public safety or strengthen up our borders. Like there's nothing in the bill on bail reform. There's nothing on the bill to give powers to Canada Border Service agents the ability to police the entire border, not just ports of entry. There is an increase in sentencing provisions for those that are, are either smuggling in guns or trafficking fentanyl or other crimes that are being committed by transnational organizations. And there's still, with the Liberals, house arrest allowed for some of the most serious crimes and offences, including those that breach the border. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about the Canadian Coast Guard, Part 4 of the Act. We support the great people of the Canadian Coast Guard for the work that they've been doing for a long, long time. And we believe that we should expand their national security and defense mandate. And so we do support the idea of bringing them in underneath national defense. But we want to make sure it's being done for the right reasons and they're given the right tools to do the job that we're going to be asking of them. We are concerned that the Liberals are only doing this for creative accounting purposes to try to increase their spending to meet the NATO 2% target, which they have to do in the next 5 months. Here we are in the middle of October, and we still don't have a plan or a budget from the Liberals on how they're going to get to that level. The estimates that we have to date show that we are going to spend somewhere around $44 billion on national defense. But in reality, to hit the 2% target, they're going to have to spend $61 billion. Where is that money coming from, and what are they going to spend it on? And here we are with only 5 months left, and we know that the Department of National Defense and Public Services and Procurement Canada have had always a hell of a time in trying to spend money before the end of the year. And you just can't shovel this money out the door. And so there needs to be a plan on how they do that, and we just don't think that that's going to happen. And so that's why we're going to see some creative accounting here by bringing in the Coast Guard underneath national defense And so we're going to get some extra spending, but not necessarily any new defense capabilities for Canada. Now, we'd like to see on every Coast Guard vessel new sensors and weapon systems. So not only can they do the surveillance that's been asked of them under Bill C-12, but they can also defend themselves if need be. As my colleague said earlier today from Cowichan, Malahad Langford had mentioned, like, the only thing that's currently on Coast Guard vessels that have any firepower is shotguns for actually protecting themselves in case they run against any predators. And you think about ice-breaking ships in the Arctic and polar bears, so they have a few shotguns with banger shells in there to scare off the polar bears. And they have another rifle that shoots beanbags, so they can actually, throw a rope and tether to another ship or come alongside another ship from that purposes. But no actual capability to defend themselves if need be. And we're going to give them, as the bill says, some security patrol capabilities or responsibilities without capability. So that is something that we're really concerned about. I want to make sure that Canadians understand, Mr. Speaker, in this House, that the Canadian Coast Guard to date has no interdiction or enforcement capabilities or mandate. Right now, if they encountered somebody illegal fishing, they have to contact Fisheries and Oceans to bring on one of their enforcement officers to actually make the arrest and levy the fines. We know that if they counted somebody in our waters that were smuggling guns or human trafficking, they would have to bring on board RCMP officers to make the arrest. So they don't have any of those availabilities at sea. Now, the current Coast Guard budget is about $2.4 billion. To date, they've only been able to include, in the last fiscal year, $560 million out of that $2.4 billion budget. And so, again, with a stroke of the pen, the Prime Minister is trying to take the money from Coast Guard and move it under national defense without actually meeting the NATO requirement. And I'll just read what the NATO requirement says. And this is out of one of their fact sheets from June 2024 on the definition of NATO expenditures that have been in place since the 1950s. And so what they're saying is a major component of defense expenditure is payments for armed forces financed from within the Ministry of Defense budget. This might also include parts of other forces, such as Ministry of Interior Troops, National Police Forces, Coast Guards, etc. In such cases, expenditures is included only in proportion to the forces that are trained in military tactics, are equipped as a military force, can operate under direct military authority in deployed operations, and can realistically be deployed outside national territory in support of military force. The Canadian Coast Guard is a civilian operation that has none of those capabilities or training at this point in time. And that's why we need to make some changes. So when I look at, take aside the creative accounting and trying to find another $20 billion in the shell game, you look at the order in council that was done by the Prime Minister back on September 2nd, where he gave the powers under the Public Service Rearrangement and Transfer Duties Act that Coast Guard would be transferred from Fisheries and Oceans over to national defense. So that includes the Canadian Coast Guard and the Canadian Coast Guard Support Services Group. Now, the Oceans Act, and as we just heard from the Parliamentary Secretary to Public Safety, is that Coast Guard will still maintain its responsibility under the Oceans Act, because under the Oceans Act, Minister means the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, and Coast Guard services include, and this is under 41(1)(a), services for safe and economical and efficient movement of ships in Canadian waters through the provision of aids to navigation systems and services, marine communications traffic management services, ice breaking and ice management services, and channel maintenance, the marine component of the Federal Search and Rescue Program, response to wrecks and hazards or dilapidated ships, marine pollution response, and support the departments, boards, and agencies of the Government of Canada through provisions of ships, aircraft, and other marine services. So we already know that now Coast Guard is going to have two masters. They're going to have Department of Fisheries and Oceans and National Defense. So how is that going to work, and how do you capture all of this, which has no paramilitary or border security role or mandate out of the Oceans Act into national defense spending? So even though in Part 4, page 11 of Bill C-12, it says in 41F in Part 4 that they were going to add security, including security patrols and the collection, analysis, and disclosure of information or intelligence, it doesn't go on anything else beyond that. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll just say this, that we support the move to the Coast Guard, but let's make sure that if the Coast Guard is coming under national defense, we give them the tools, the capabilities, and the training so they can actually do the job that they're going to be accounted for by these Liberals in their own budget.
Questions and comments. Questions and commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, interesting enough, the member himself was a part of a government where we saw cutbacks to Canada border control, and yet now you contrast that to Canada's current Prime Minister. Not only are we committed to bringing forward legislation which is going to be helping in securing our borders, the Prime Minister and the government has made it very clear that we are going to provide financial resources. And a good example of that is 1,000 new Canada Border Control agents and people working within CBSA. Does the member not agree the contrast between the Conservatives and the Liberals is quite extensive, with the Liberals definitely showing goodwill in getting things done and protecting our borders?
Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Well, I'd like to remind the member from Winnipeg North, who, you know, has the most words spoken in this House, but has said the least in every intervention that he does. But I'll just remind him that it was under our government that we actually made the CBSA officers, moved them from being civilian agents to being paramilitary, and that we trained them and armed them up. We actually had at the Defense Committee the former Deputy Commissioner for Operations of the Coast Guard, Chris Henderson, just a few weeks ago, and he said, my strong recommendation is to provide new legislation, the Canadian Coast Guard Act, that would enshrine its national security role, and that it be given a law enforcement mandate to protect Canada's interests anytime and anywhere on a huge expanse of maritime territory. So, you know, they can talk about 1,000 new border agents, which we need, but give them control over the entire border. But let's make sure that we turn Coast Guard officials and agents into actual officers so they can do the job of protecting Canada.
Questions and commentaires. On have the député de Mirabel.
The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all agree that we need to increase the effectiveness of border controls. We need new measures. Now, with C-12, we have the new version of C-2. C-2 led to a great deal of concern in civil society because many people outside of this parliament and also in the opposition here felt that with the excuse of protecting our borders, the government was going to violate our right to privacy, and that all of this was contradictory. Earlier, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety told us that the government had removed parts of the legislation that were unacceptable for civil society and the opposition. And that then they tabled C-12, which we agree on more, but the Parliamentary Secretary said that the unacceptable measures are not going to be given up on by the government, that they still want to bring them back to Parliament. For example, police officers being able to open mail. So I'd like to hear from my colleague. What measures were in C-2 that are not in C-12? And what measures would he like to see in further legislation?
Interlake Eastman.
Well, I want to thank the member for his question, and I can just say this, that in C2, giving the power to employees of Canada Post to seize and search mail without having any warrant is a complete violation of our charter rights. Everybody's entitled to jurisprudence, and that was actually undermined by the Liberals. In C2, they were also going after the seizure of information through internet service providers, telecom companies, that we also know is again a violation of privacy rights. And finally, I would say that under C2, where they want to limit the use of cash to under $10,000 a year, undermining our legal tender in this country is ridiculous.
Questions, comments. Now, member for Calgary Crowfoot, about 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, is the member concerned that our NATO allies will see right through the accounting trickery of shifting a budget for the Coast Guard from a civilian budget to the Canadian Armed Forces without actually improving or enhancing our defense preparedness?
The Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
My friend and colleague from Calgary for his question, and I have there's no doubt in my mind that the Liberals are strictly making this change in C-12 to the Oceans Act to make sure that they have the ability to declare that they now have given the security and border control mandate to the Coast Guard, and that should be counted towards the 2% and now actually the 5%. And I can tell you that you won't fool anyone at NATO with this trickery, as my colleague said, because at the end of the day, they have to be, according to their own definition, the ability to provide military, tactical capabilities, and the Coast Guard currently does not.